Okay, real talk for a second. Kings are a wild concept when you actually sit with. At some point, a bunch of humans looked at one dude and were like, yep, that's the guy. Give him the palace, the army, the tax revenue, the throne, and while we're at it, maybe a direct hotline to God. And everybody else was just supposed to act like that was normal. No pushback, no side-eye, nothing. Here's the thing, though. For the vast majority of the time our species has existed, nobody lived under a king. Not even close. We lived in small bands where if some guy got a little too big for his britches, the group had options. They'd clown him, freeze him out, straight up ignore him, or just pack up and dip. So how in the world did we go from don't tell me what to do to your royal highness? Nobody invented monarchy in one shot. There's no caveman who filed a patent for the crown. Kings showed up when a handful of older human inventions crashed into each other. Stored wealth, permanent towns, warfare, religion, inheritance, and the headache of organizing thousands of strangers who don't all know each other's business anymore. The crown was just the wrapping paper. The real invention was obedience. Part 1. Why kings couldn't exist yet. Before humans could build kings, they had to build a world where a king could actually stick around. And for most of our history, that was a serious problem. Small hunter-gatherer crews were basically kryptonite for anybody with dictator energy. Get too bossy, hog too much food, start acting like the group exists to hype you up. People had moves. Mock you, ice you out, refuse to cooperate, leave. And that last one's huge. Mobility was power back then. If your whole camp could grab their stuff and walk 20 miles the other direction, good luck ruling anybody long term. You can't tax people who vanished into the woods. Anthropologists actually have a name for this. Leveling mechanisms. Gossip, ridicule, food-sharing rules, group decision-making, people teaming up against anyone getting too full of themselves. A great hunter got respect, sure, but respect isn't the same as command. Bagging the biggest kill didn't unlock supreme leader status. Now don't get it twisted. This wasn't some peaceful hippie utopia. Humans build pecking orders easily. Age, gender, fighting skill, ritual knowledge, family ties, generosity, straight-up charisma. All of that could tilt influence one way or another. But there's a real difference between people who carry weight and an actual king. A king needs power that sticks. Not people listen to Dave because Dave knows where the good hunting grounds are. More like Dave controls the land, the resources, an armed crew, the religious ceremonies, and somehow Dave's 12-year-old son inherits all of it despite being the most annoying kid in camp. That kind of setup needs infrastructure. Reasons to stay put, resources worth fighting over, enough surplus to feed people who don't farm, and a system for passing status down the family line. And that's exactly where the story shifts. Part 2. Farming invents the spreadsheet. Way before any king we've got on record, some communities started settling down for good, sticking near good fishing spots, gathering wild grain, building permanent structures, stockpiling food, eventually domesticating crops and animals. And once that happens, wealth can pile up. And wealth that piles up, that can be guarded. A hunter's reputation dies with him. A barn full of grain doesn't. Neither does a field, a herd, or a house sitting on good land. Once people had real stuff invested in one spot, stuff you couldn't just sling over your shoulder and walk away from, leaving got expensive. Sure, you could still bounce, but now your grain's here, your livestock's here, your dead relatives are buried here, and honestly, your whole future's tied up here too. We spent hundreds of thousands of years figuring out how to keep ambitious people in check. Then we built villages, and suddenly ambition had a home address. Farming didn't create kings overnight. It created something way more dangerous, a spreadsheet. Not literally, but once people started growing grain, raising animals, and stacking up harvests, wealth got easy to measure, divide, inherit, and steal. That changes everything. Picture two families in the same early village. One's got a slightly better plot, better soil, more relatives to help it harvest, maybe just lucky 3 years running. Their granary's overflowing. The other family has a rough patch. Now the well-off family can lend grain, trade food for labor, snag some livestock, arrange a good marriage, or set up favors that outlast the original emergency by a mile. Feudalism's not invented yet, but the ingredients are starting to look suspicious. Archaeologists can literally track the house sizes, storage space, what's buried with people, access to imported goods, eventually massive architecture. Not every farming society went down this road. Plenty stayed pretty flat. But agriculture cracked open opportunities mobile groups just never had at that scale. And concentrated surplus meant some folks didn't have to farm at all. Craftsmen, traders, priests, administrators, warriors, all fed by other people's labor. Huge upgrade for society. Also basically the birth of the staff meeting. As towns grew, things got complicated fast. Irrigation needed upkeep. Fields needed boundaries. Grain stores needed guards. Trade needed structure. Fights needed referees. Big projects needed labor coordination. Even if nobody wanted a boss, somebody had to start making calls. At first, that authority was probably temporary, rotating, tied to a good harvest feast, a respected family, a religious role, a war hero. But here's the key part. Those advantages started stacking on top of each other. Food bought followers. Followers protected food. Prestige pulled in alliances. Alliances led to marriages. Marriages made heirs. Heirs inherited land, connections, and status. Power was getting sticky. And once a town held thousands of people instead of a few dozen, you couldn't just gather everyone around a fire and hash out why Kyle stole the neighbor's goat again. You needed institutions. You needed specialists. You needed somebody in charge. Then violence entered the chat. Permanent settlements were juicy targets. Grain stores to raid, herds to steal, land to fight over. And when there's a real threat outside the walls, people get way more comfortable with somebody calling the shots. A war leader who kept winning racked up followers, loot, prestige, and control over how it all got shared out. Win enough battles, and temporary leadership starts looking like a permanent gig. The first kings didn't show up because everybody fell head over heels for monarchy. They showed up in a world where wealth could pile up, people couldn't easily scatter, institutions kept growing, and organized violence rewarded whoever could get others to fall in line. Humanity had built a surplus. Now somebody just had to decide who ran it. Part 3. Uruk and the birth of bureaucracy. Fast forward to around 3200 BCE, southern Mesopotamia. The city of Uruk is going off. Not big city energy by today's standards, nobody stuck in traffic or paying $8 for a latte. But compared to the villages humans had lived in for millennia, Uruk was a completely different animal. Monumental buildings, specialized labor, long-distance trade, temples, administrators, and enough strangers packed together that just remembering who owes who 3 baskets of barley stopped working as a system. So humans started writing stuff down. And get this, some of the earliest tablets out of Uruk aren't epic poems about legendary rulers. They're paperwork. Grain counts, livestock, labor rosters, rations, officials. Civilization invented bureaucracy before it invented literature. One early record from Uruk lists something like 120 different officials. Law, farming, livestock, crafts, religion. Whatever was running that city, it wasn't a village elder settling a squabble between cousins anymore. Authority was getting organized. Now, archaeologists are careful here. Administrators and temples and big buildings don't automatically prove Uruk had kings in the fully modern sense. Early political titles are murky, and their meaning shifted over time. But a few centuries later, the evidence gets impossible to miss. By the early dynastic period, cities like Kish, Lagash, and Uruk are rival political powerhouses. Inscriptions name actual rulers. Warfare shows up constantly in art and text, and elite burials show insane wealth gaps. Then there's the royal cemetery at graves from around the mid-3rd millennium BCE stuffed with gold, silver, lapis lazuli, instruments, weapons, luxury goods hauled in from crazy distances. Some graves even had multiple attendants buried alongside the main body. Whatever exactly went down at those funerals is still debated, but the message from the tombs isn't subtle. These weren't regular people. There's a famous artifact called the Standard of that shows rows of soldiers, prisoners, workers, animals, and one figure right in the center, drawn noticeably bigger than everyone else. Ancient artists weren't bad at perspective. Size was politics. The important guy literally took up more space on purpose. By now, leadership had become visible everywhere. Architecture, paperwork, warfare, luxury goods, burial customs, official titles. Power wasn't just some charismatic guy talking a big game face-to-face anymore. It had offices, symbols, records, ceremonies, and eventually entire dynasties. This right here is the turning point where kingship becomes recognizable. A guy who's not just the toughest dude in town, but someone sitting at the center of a whole system built to collect resources, command labor, run wars, talk to the gods, and hand it all down the family line. Which brings up the real question. Why did thousands of people just go along with this? Part 4. Why did people accept it? Archaeology's great at proving kings existed. It's a lot worse at explaining why people agreed to bow down. There's no ancient memo titled, "Reasons We've Decided Dave is Now Sacred." So historians have built a few competing theories. One's about warfare. If towns were scrapping over land, water, trade routes, or food, then whoever had the strongest coordinated military leadership had an edge. A winning commander pulls in followers and loot, and temporary wartime power can slide into something permanent. Makes sense on the surface, but it's a little too neat. Plenty of societies fought, plenty of wars without ever crowning a dynasty out of it. Another theory is about economic control. Whoever controls the grain stores, the irrigation, the trade routes, or the good land ends up managing people whether they meant to or not. Control the surplus, and suddenly your opinion matters a lot. But Mesopotamian economies weren't some simple one-guy-owns-everything setup. Temples, households, merchants, laborers, all tangled together differently across regions and time periods. Then there's religion, and honestly, this one might be the biggest piece. If a leader could claim a special connection to the gods, run the temples, sponsor the rituals, and frame military wins as divine approval, that's a whole different level of legitimacy than force alone. A soldier can make you obey while he's standing right there. A god can supposedly watch you when nobody's looking. Way more efficient. Some historians point to plain old coordination. Growing towns needed somebody managing labor, settling disputes, keeping infrastructure running, distributing resources. Strong leadership might have actually solved real problems, meaning people sometimes accepted more inequality because centralized authority handled expensive collective headaches, which makes kingship messier and more interesting. Maybe early states weren't purely a protection racket or purely a community project. They were both at once. A ruler organizes the irrigation and taxes you for it, protects the trade routes and demands your labor, defends the city and builds himself a monument for doing it. And honestly, there may not be one single road that leads to monarchy everywhere. Egypt built kingship differently than Mesopotamia did. Other societies built powerful hereditary rulers under totally different conditions. Some cities never got a king at all. History just refuses to hand us a clean, one-size-fits-all origin story. So maybe who invented kings is the wrong question. Kingship wasn't invented like the wheel. It emerged when different kinds of power started locking together. Economic, military, religious, administrative, and family inheritance. Any one of those can exist without a king. But once one person, one family, or one office managed to stack enough of them together, something new became possible. A leader stopped needing to prove himself every single morning. His position went from normal to traditional to sacred to hereditary. And once people stopped asking why one family ran everything and started assuming that family was simply always meant to rule, kingship crossed a line it never came back from. Part 5. Selling the story. Once kings existed, they faced a harder problem than conquering a city, making domination feel natural. You can win a battle with spears. You cannot run a dynasty on spears alone. Eventually, people start asking annoying questions like, why does his family get everything? And why am I the one hauling stone for his temple? So kings wrapped raw power in something way stronger than force, meaning. In Mesopotamia, kings started presenting themselves as chosen by the gods, protected by the gods, part of some cosmic order. The Sumerian King List literally opens with the line that kingship descended straight from heaven. That's genius PR, honestly. Way better than our family seized power during a messy regional conflict. Nope. Heaven did it. Take it up with heaven. Most kings didn't claim to actually be gods, to be fair. More often, they styled themselves as divinely favored shepherds, responsible for justice, temples, war, and keeping the balance between humans and the divine. Sounds gentle till you remember what a shepherd's actual job is, deciding where the herd goes. Religion also gave kingship a calendar, festivals, temple rituals, processions, coronations, turning authority into something people experienced over and over, not just a one-time power grab. If the harvest came in, good, divine order was working. If enemies got crushed, the gods approved. If a massive temple went up, that proved devotion, and a serious talent for getting thousands of people to haul bricks. Monuments mattered because power hits different once it's physical. Palaces, temples, statues, city walls. You could walk through it, look up at it, one day get buried underneath it. And dynasties made the whole thing durable. A powerful ruler eventually dies, which is a real problem for any system built around one guy being special. Inheritance fixes that. If power belongs to a bloodline instead of a person, succession is easy to explain. The son doesn't start from zero. He inherits the alliances, the property, the story of why his family belongs on top. Some rulers pushed it even further. The Akkadian king Naram-Sin, ruling around the 23rd century BCE, actually took on divine status while he was still alive. His name got written with the symbol reserved for gods. Art from his reign shows him towering over everyone else, literally bigger, higher, closer to the heavens. On his famous victory stele, he's shown climbing a mountain above his defeated enemies, wearing the horned helmet that marked divinity, standing taller than every single person around him. Ancient propaganda understood camera angles before cameras even existed. But the real win for kingship wasn't convincing people one ruler was special. It was convincing them the office itself was necessary. Kings ran justice, funded temples, organized armies, moved wealth around, negotiated with other powers, and represented the whole community to gods and enemies alike. The institution wove itself into daily life. Taxes fed administrators. Administrators kept records. Records propped up institutions. Institutions backed armies. Armies protected kings. Kings funded temples. Temples backed up the kings. Basically, a feedback loop wearing jewelry. And because kingship now lived inside rituals, buildings, laws, myths, and bloodlines, killing a king didn't kill the system anymore. Another king just stepped in. That was the real breakthrough, turning personal dominance into an institution that could outlive the person running it. The crown got bigger than the head wearing it. Wrap up. Here's the thing about kings that actually matters. It was never the crown. It was the idea sitting underneath it. Once humans figured out how to separate authority from the actual person holding it, political power could survive death. A king could die, get buried with insane ceremony, and still leave behind an office, a dynasty, a legal system, a tax structure, and a son raised his whole life to believe all of it was totally reasonable. That idea reshaped civilization. Kingship helped build armies, roads, temples, irrigation, diplomacy, law, and long-distance trade. It also justified conquest, forced labor, and insane concentrations of wealth. Same institution, same city wall, and the same power that made thousands of people build it. Modern countries obviously aren't ancient kingdoms. Most of us don't think our tax office got appointed by a storm god. Probably. But we still live inside one of kingship's biggest inventions. The idea that an institution can hold authority longer than any one person does. Presidents leave. Judges retire. CEOs step down. The office sticks around. The ancient world spent thousands of years turning one guy's personal dominance into something abstract, transferable, and legit. A throne was just the first container built for that idea. And maybe that's why kings still feel ridiculous and weirdly familiar at the same time. The jewelry's ridiculous. The giant chair's ridiculous. Claiming heaven personally picked your bloodline is, at minimum, some bold marketing. But the actual problem kingship was trying to solve was real. How do thousands, then millions, of total strangers agree on who's in charge? Humans tried a bunch of answers over the centuries, and at some point, one answer became one person, one bloodline, one sacred title, and everybody else was expected to kneel. So next time you're standing in front of a crown behind museum glass, remember what you're really looking at. It's not the invention of one ambitious guy. It's the invention of a story strong enough to outlive him. Which brings us right back to where we started. Why'd that guy get the palace, the army, the taxes, and the big fancy chair? Because eventually, people stopped asking about the guy. They started believing in the chair.